When we stop to consider the reality of ghosts, we fail to take into consideration that they, too, have regrets. What would you do if you suddenly were victimized by an evil spirit? Hello, I am author and paranormal investigator Donald Allen Kirch, and this is Stranger Than Fiction.
Forget the world you know. Enter a bizarre dimension where the strange and unusual guide your imagination towards the unimaginable. Life is stranger than fiction in these true stories, where the ordinary is replaced with the extraordinary. Explore strange legends, weird myths, and odd folklore. The facts are laid before you to examine. You're invited to draw your own conclusions on these true stories of the paranormal.
In 1982, 20th Century Fox released a horror movie that took America by surprise. It was a fantastic story about a woman who claimed to have been raped by a ghost. Starring Barbara Hershey, the motion picture was based upon a best-selling novel by veteran writer Frank D. Felitta. The name of the film was The Entity. The film did well at the box office and is considered a classic by lovers of the paranormal. What a lot of people do not realize, however, is that the whole story is based on an actual event. This really happened. Two paranormal investigators were overheard one day back in 1974 going over some facts in a Culver City bookstore by a rather disturbed woman named Doris. At first, she didn't really know how to approach them, but she was desperate enough to try. Upon explaining her troubles to the investigators, Dr. Barry Taft and his associate, Carrie Gaynor, they decided to inquire further, discussing the case with their fellow associates. So, on August 22, 1974, both investigators visited a small house at 11547 Braddock Drive in Culver City, fully expecting this to become the fastest open and shut case they would encounter. They were not expecting too much. Paranormal investigators were often plagued with frauds and cranks. Little did they realize that both were stumbling into horrors and unknowns never documented before. The investigators had to use their best poker faces upon entering the home. The house was in a shambles and the family lived in conditions best labeled squalid. There was an unsettling the two felt upon entering and a feeling of overpressure in their ears while being within the house. Never ones to leap before they looked, neither man could get over how negative everything and everyone had felt. The house was neither healthy nor happy, to say the least. The woman who had claimed all these fantastic things held within her a dark and mysterious past. She had suffered great abuse from both her parents as well as from the men who had been in her life. Even her 3 sons held animosity toward their mother. This got their interest because any paranormal scholar worth his salt would tell you that the unconscious mind, suffering from an abusive atmosphere, was like a magnet to almost all paranormal activities. With just the right trigger, a troubled mind could assume control, creating either poltergeist activity or psychosomatic trauma. Doris's claims were fantastic. She had stated that during the course of her day, ghosts would attack her. Some as innocent as just bumping into her, and others as serious as spectral rape. Both investigators took down all the information, but knew from past experiences that collected evidence from any ghost encounter was hard to prove in the scientific arena. Spectral rape would have been impossible given the limited technology of the 1970s. Then, Doris showed them the marks on her body. Unveiling her clothes, the woman showed off bruises upon her inner thighs, teeth marks where it would have been impossible for her to self-inflict, and cuts and scars resembling tiny hands upon both ankles and her wrist. Stories taken from the family upon later interviews corroborated what Doris had been claiming. Doris from the start had stated that she believed the ghostly rapists were Asian men. The visions and nightly visits became so commonplace that one of the children had labeled the specter Mr. Who's-It. It took some coaxing, but Doris finally detailed her rape, stating that two of the spirits were tiny in stance, like dwarfs. These dwarfs would end up holding her down, allowing her to fight, and seemed to gain great pleasure from her actions. While fighting these spirits, the taller, more powerful, and dangerous of the group would end up having his way with her. The woman's oldest son admitted to seeing her mother being tossed about, and when he had tried to help her, was thrown across the room. He saw no one other than his mother during the whole of the event. Doris's sanity was questioned. And really, how could you blame the paranormal investigators? Rape was difficult enough to prove. How was one to gather evidence or record anything left by a ghost? It had been theorized by one staff psychologist that the woman had manifested the ghostly rape to help cover up her subconscious guilt of masturbation. Another had suggested that the bruises were from an angry boyfriend, topped off by a pair of false teeth used to create the spectral bite marks. None of these were beyond the world of plausibility, but could not be proven either. During most of the encounters, Doris was around her children and had never been left alone. Although skeptical, no one within the investigative group could envision Doris doing all of these things within eyeshot of her children. Convinced that they were dealing with an actual phenomenon, a team of photographers, independent investigators, and high-speed cameramen were brought in. They literally set up a campsite inside the tiny, uncomfortable home. Doris Byther's life was soon placed under a microscope. Nothing at first happened. Paranormal studies takes with it patience learned over time. Hauntings and ghosts do not have to live under the same rules or timetables as humans have to. Like Dracula, time is on their side. Doubts were cast, and almost all were ready to call it quits when all hell broke loose. Doris had decided to take things into her own hands. With cameras and machines clicking around her, the desperate woman sat upon her bed, yelling up at the spirits. There were at least 30 investigators in the tiny room, all hearing this woman curse up a storm. A greenish mist started to produce itself within a corner. As the thing took form, everyone was surprised to see the outline of a man's torso floating in the air. The entity was rather large, and it was reported by more than one investigator that the being had a lot of muscles. At no time did the spirit show a face or human identity. One investigator soon fainted, a victim of too much heat and excitement. Investigators were soon disappointed to discover that none of this encounter would come out upon their film or photos. These people were not cub reporters. They all knew their trade. Whatever the thing was, it did not wish to be recorded. The only evidence of the encounter was a now famous picture of an arc of light surrounding Doris, along with a few other orbs in the air. What makes this picture fascinating is that the arc of light appears smooth. It is not contouring to the corners of the room. To a skeptic, this is an important fact. It means that this arc of light was not a projection. If it were, it would have been subject to the walls and would have appeared as such in the photograph. The arc of light within the picture is directly in front of a corner and is independent from its environment. To this day, this picture has remained a paranormal mystery. The eldest son would later claim that activity within their home often intensified when he started to play certain music. His favorite music was from the groups Black Sabbath and Uriah Heep. At one point, a barrage of orbs attacked the investigators when the boy started to play his music. The entity seemed to react violently towards any song mentioning Satan or devil worship. All this went on for about 2.5 months. There are some fascinating theories as to why this case has never been solved, and indeed why it continues to plague this woman and her children. Poltergeist activity can sometimes be manifested by negative energy. The name poltergeist is German for angry spirit or ghost. Doris's addiction toward alcohol and her abusive nature, added with her belligerent ways towards her own children, could have been an important catalyst. She repeatedly refused professional help, often drinking heavily while those around her tried their best to stop her. Also, there were no reported paranormal activities when Doris was away from her home. Each and every encounter was with her as the eye of the storm. When intoxicated, Doris seemed to call up the ghost on cue. When not under the influence, the investigative teams got nothing. Could the foggy cloud of alcohol have been used by Doris as a means to help free her natural psychic abilities? Like all things, there came an end to this horrific investigation. Doris Spither was soon left alone with her demons. After a few more months of attacks and an odd smell of decay coming from the kitchen, Doris and her children packed up, leaving their small Culver City home. The hauntings stopped. No one living within the home since has reported anything out of the ordinary. Doris, sad to say, did not profit from the story, investigation, best-selling novel, or motion picture based upon her rather fantastic experiences. Instead, she and her children bounced around several more homes and apartments in California, and then moved to Texas. From time to time, she would make contact with those who still cared, informing them that the ghost had followed her and still continued with their attacks. One last note. Doris, while living in Texas, had tried to claim yet another ghostly rape, and that she had been impregnated by her attackers. An investigation was launched, and no evidence of a fetus was ever found. Medical records indicated that the physician had labeled the whole affair as nothing more than a hysterical pregnancy. The power of the mind is almost unlimited. It has been proven, studied, and suggested that if a person believes strong enough, anything is possible. Perhaps, after so many years of abuse, Doris Blyther cried out for attention the only way her mind would or could allow. There is evil in this world. Of that there is no doubt. All one has to do is turn on the local news and see constant proof of that. Most evil preys upon those who have no means or belief structure in place to combat it. Evil looks for those who have no hope. Doris was at the bottom of a poverty-driven abyss, looking for any way out. One dark night, she desperately prayed for much-needed attention, and something that she did not expect listened and answered her call. Doris Byther has not been heard from or seen since the late 1980s. Her children have never come forward, and no further information has been made available to those parties still interested in her fantastic claims. To this day, this case remains both open and unsolved. Well, this concludes our journey into both the strange and the bizarre. If you are curious to read some of my personal works, please go to DonaldAllenKirch.com. That's Donald Allen, A-L-L-E-N, Kirch, K-I-R-C-H, one word, DonaldAllenKirch.com. Tune in next time when I will introduce you to yet another story that is stranger than fiction. Until we meet again, this is Donald Allen Kirch wishing you unpleasant dreams. Good night.